Good morning, everyone. We are just going to give it a couple of more minutes just to allow extra persons to join. So please bear with us. Okay, good morning, everyone, and you are very welcome to this morning's webinar by Ark Workplace Risk. We are going to be breaking down Martyn's Law. So are you crisis ready? Protecting people, property and reputation. So this morning's webinar will be delivered by David Hills, Senior Director within Ark Workplace Risk. So before we commence, I would like to talk a bit about Ark and who we are. So within Ark Workplace Risk, we have over 30 years of industry leadership, and we serve as a direct extension of your team. And we're very privileged to be able to deliver tailored solutions that protect your people, your properties, and your operations for that complete peace of mind. So within Ark, our approach combines the industry's top consultants with our intuitive CUDA platform to simplify your compliance management, which inevitably will also save time to allow you to focus on critical tasks. So beyond the day-to-day support, we guide you through complex, contentious and critical situations with confidence and provide you with the tools and insights that you need to make sure you have those well-formed decisions in any scenario that you may be presented with. So you can very much count on us within Ark Workplace Risk to be your dedicated, trusted risk, safety and compliance partner. And we ensure that you will always meet today's standards while preparing you for any challenges that happen in the future legislative landscape within the UK currently. So on today's webinar, what we will be going through is a brief introduction. So this will walk through the background and give, I suppose, the current terrorism risk in the UK that we're facing at the moment. We will go through Martyn's Law within detail. So we will go through the duties under the Act and give that real deep dive into what it really means for you and how it affects you and your business. We'll go through the landscape of risk and what this will look like in the future. We will then go through in detail emergency preparedness testing and what this looks like and the requirements for it, and inevitably what good looks like, and it enables you to go through what steps you need to do to meet the framework to ensure you're hitting all these key elements from the Act. We will go through a case study, a very interesting and topical case study that was completed in March of this year and very relevant to the current landscape in the industry. We will walk through the competence required and the coordination required in order to ensure that you're meeting the requirements here of this Act, and why this really is so critical to ensure that you are doing your emergency preparedness testings, how you can be competent and ensure correct and appropriate coordination. We will go through then in detail as well next steps. What do you need to do and how you navigate it? As always, we will allow time at the end for questions, a Q&A. So we have a Q&A function within the chat function here. So please, as we're going through the webinar, ensure to ask your questions and we will endeavour to allow time at the end to walk through. So I will now pass you over to David Hills to go through today's webinar.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, good morning, everybody. Hope everyone is well. My name's David Hills. I'm Senior Director at Ark. I've been with the business for over 25 years, and prior to that, I worked in local government, in local authority building control, but also I was on the emergency preparedness and civil emergency team. I've attended the UK Resilience Academy, run by the Home Office. And in addition to that, I hold the RICS Public Safety Foundation Award and an award in the administration and enforcement of public safety legislation. So I've got a huge amount of experience over the last, certainly over the last 25, 30 years of delivering and moderating as well emergency preparedness exercises for a whole host of different clients and across a whole range of different properties. Okay, so as Tara said, I want to take you through very quickly the background to what we've got here. The reality is this. Crisis events are no longer, unfortunately, very rare. So when something happens, your preparedness actually isn't just being tested, but it's also, it becomes your reputation. So we have to accept the fact that we are seeing more and more disruptions, fires and building safety events, events, for example, such as environmental incidents, storms. Just a couple of days ago, 5 days ago, we had Storm Claudia pass across the UK. We've also got other things such as natural events, and that's a photograph there, for example, of a very large sinkhole that was formed in the main road going through Godstone in Surrey. It is still there. They are still dealing with it. That came out in February. So we are also seeing that. And of course, we've had wildfires as well. So there's lots of environmental incidents that we need to be thinking about. And in addition to that, we've got violent protests and violent incidents. We've had protests and person-borne incidents are very much in the news at the moment, and very much in the news over the last 20 or 30 days. So I think it's really important that we recognise that whilst Martyn's Law focuses very much on the terrorist side of things, other things occur as well. And other things need to be dealt with in respect of a crisis. Yes, today we're going to focus on the legal aspects of Martyn's Law and very specifically look at why emergency preparedness testing is so important. It's a crucial part of the whole process. But those emergency preparedness tests can be extended out to cover fires, environmental incidents, and other things such as violent incidents as well. So we have to recognise we've got new laws. We have to recognise as well that those new laws mean that the various stakeholders are going to have in place very proactive preparedness arrangements. When I talk about the stakeholders, we're talking here, for example, of the likes of owners, but also people such as insurers. So insurers are increasingly asking about what proactive methods that you are using in order to protect yourself and prepare yourself for any particular incident. Oh, sorry, wrong button. So the law, whilst is new, Martyn's Law is new, and it expects you to be able to respond effectively to any type of event or terrorist event. But the public are now, and insurers are now expecting you to have, as I said, in place arrangements so you can respond to any type of event. And I suppose what it comes down to at the end of the day is that duty of care that that is often felt, that you only have to provide a duty of care to the people who live, who work or are visiting your particular buildings. Well, actually, that goes well beyond now. It's not an optional extra. Duty of care actually affects the wider community as well. So right now, the UK's terrorism threat is set at what's called substantial. And that is issued by the security service, MI5. And the website that I've actually highlighted there, actually, you can go onto at any time and actually look at the current terrorism threat level in the UK. And that basically means that at the moment there is an attack likely, both from internal and domestic terrorism as well. We can look at recent storms. As I said, a couple of days ago, 5 days ago, we had Storm Claudia come through, and the Met Office issued an amber warning basically informing us of the particular concerns. And as you saw in the last photograph, for example, Monmouth got hit really, really badly. So we are facing more intense weather events, but we're also going to be looking at the moment anyway, more protests and more frequent protests. If, for example, you go on to the Extinction Rebellion website, you will find over the next 5 to 6 days, there are going to be around about 20 protests or 20 meetings from various bodies relating to this particular part. So this basically means that your emergency planning can't just be single hazard approach. It can't be outdated. It's got to be kept up to date. You need flexible frameworks that work under what are going to be rapidly changing conditions. And again, that is mainly why the government earlier this year passed what's called Martyn's Law, which is effectively called the Terrorism and Protection of Buildings Act 2025. So Martyn's Law is a major shift in how organisations prepare for unintentional threats. It formalises the expectation that if you operate or have a means of control within a building, then you need to take responsibility for public protection. And the Act sets out various layers. As I said, those new responsibilities. It then talks about what's called standard premises, enhanced premises, and qualifying events. And I'll spend a couple of moments going through that. But then it sets out some very, very clear, proportionate steps that you will need to take, depending upon who you actually are and what you're doing, to assess and evaluate excuse me, the risks associated with your particular building, to determine and set out very clear public protection policies and procedures, whether it's for a standard building or for an enhanced building. You'll have to notify the SIA, the Security Industry Authority, as the new regulator. You will have to undertake training of staff and undertake regular exercises, which is where we want to focus on today, as well as cooperate with other people. And depending if you are an enhanced duty holder, then you'll have to nominate a senior manager to take over complete responsibility for this. And then we've got to accept that the new law actually has some stick to this particular approach, where, for example, the SIA are able to, as they become the regulator, are able to serve notices, whether it's compliance notice, restriction notices. They can even prosecute you as well, and they can prosecute individuals, not just the organizations. And if we're putting it bluntly, the penalties and the fines are very, very high. In one case, for example, it's up to 10% of your global turnover, which could be coming out as a particular fine. So we've got to accept that this isn't just about best practice anymore. Emergency preparedness now, it's effectively a regulated duty. So let's just very quickly then have a look at what type of premises we're actually talking about here. Because as I said, the law provides those two levels of responsibility, the standard duty and the enhanced duty. But let's just look at a qualifying premises. A qualifying premises is a premises consisting of a building or a building and land. And for a terminology here, when we speak about buildings, that could either be a part of a building, a tenancy, for example, or it could be a group of buildings. And basically, as long as those premises or parts of those premises are wholly or mainly used for one of the more purposes that are set out within Schedule 1 of the Act, and I'll go through those particular requirements in a few moments, then they are what's called a qualifying premises. Now, we mentioned the two levels of responsibility, the standard duty and the enhanced duty. So let's have a quick look at the standard duty. The standard duty basically says that it would be reasonable to expect that from time to time 200 or more individuals could be or may be present on the premises at the same time, even if that is very occasionally. That basically, that photograph there shows approximately 200 people. That's the total number of people. Now, an enhanced level is where we have exactly the same situation. So it's reasonable to expect that from time to time, a certain number of people will be present, even if it's occasionally, but we're talking about 800 people. And that's what 800 people actually looks like. So the threshold, or the thresholds that are actually now in place, aren't about how busy you are, or it's about the realistic potential of the space that you are in control of, the realistic potential. So if your space could accommodate those particular numbers of people, then under the Act, you need to therefore register the building and prepare accordingly. So let's talk about the actual use of the building. So I'm just going to pick out 4 sections first, and let's look at firstly shops and shopping centres. So if a building is used for the retail sale of goods, the display of goods, or the provision of services, where there is, for example, the sale, display, or service is principally for visiting members of the public, so shop units, shopping centres, etc., then you are covered. Now, I've done some quick calculations here. So if we take a shop unit, then a standard one would be anything between 30 meters squared all the way up to 400 meters squared. That does depend upon the type of building that it's actually being used. Whether you've got large product sales, such as white goods, furniture, etc., then you're looking at the lower level. Or if it's just a standard approach, then up to 400 meters squared. Enhanced, that would be between 150 meters squared and 1,600 meters squared. But for mall areas, the standard 140 meters squared, and for an enhanced, approximately 560 meters squared. So we are not talking about very, very large buildings or very, very large units here. We're also talking about food and drink outlets. So for anything that's used for the sale of food or drink, so pubs and restaurants, they are also covered. And again, we should be looking at anything for a standard unit of between 60 and 200 meters squared. Again, if it's just a bar where people are standing, you could be looking at 60 meters squared. If we've got a restaurant where people are sitting down, we could be looking at 200 meters squared. And enhanced, that moves up to 240 to 400 meters squared. We're also talking about entertainment and leisure venues. And again, those sizes I've included there for information, and we make sure that you get a copy of these slides going forward. But also we're talking about halls. And so it's going to actually impact other areas as well. And some of those halls may not be in places where perhaps people traditionally believe that they have that responsibility. It's basically, though, we've got to start thinking about how many people could potentially use the space that we have. Now, the figures I've given you there are subject to potentially new secondary legislation. And so the data that I've provided you at the moment is based on current, what we call occupancy factors that are detailed within approved document B. That is currently how people are looking at it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those final figures are going to be accurate. That could change. They're the 4 main areas that would affect most of our clients and yourselves, but I have to say that all of the other ones are out there. So we're looking at sports grounds, libraries, museums and galleries, hotels, visitor attractions, places of worship, healthcare places, transportation hubs, bus, coach and air, childcare facilities, and then all of the educational elements as well. So tenants within all of those particular types of buildings, all of those, and anyone that has actually a particularly larger complex will also carry responsibility. But let's look at the level of and who are actually responsible for this. So a person is responsible for a qualifying premises if that person has control of that premises in connection with the relevant use. So what are we talking about here? Owners and operators and their property managers all have a degree of control of a particular premises. Owners may transfer that responsibility to property managers, but they are still in control of the premises. And of course, we're talking about tenants and operators. So if, for example, a person or an organization leases either a building or a part of that particular building, such as a large shop or even a smaller shop, or a restaurant, bar within a shopping center, or in any other particular location, and is in control of that part, they will also be a responsible person. The difficulty we've got here, though, is that the law makes it very clear that property managers, for example, they even residential property managers may get caught up into this particular part, because if there is more than one person responsible for a qualifying premises or a qualifying event, which I'll touch on in a few moments, then references within the Act to the persons who are responsible reply to all of those parties. So take a residential block, which is a pure residential block, but perhaps has a large retail unit on the ground floor. Well, therefore, as property managers, as owners and operators of that particular building, you are also considered to be responsible persons under this particular act. So all of the responsible persons act and must act jointly in complying with the requirements imposed on them. So just because a property manager has, for example, a building that may not meet the requirements, you may, for example, have a commercial operation, and that commercial building has a number of tenancies within it, but perhaps in one area, that tenant invites members of the public into that particular area for example, for training purposes or anything else. If that tenant has or could hold more than 200 people, then they are a qualifying premises, and therefore the property manager, whilst they are not responsible for such areas, will still have to cooperate and coordinate their activities with the tenants themselves. They have to act jointly in complying. That's the terminology within the Act. I just really want to mention very quickly qualifying events, because again, they are important. You may have a retail park, but you decide to have an event at that retail park. Again, if, for example, you have more than 800 people, or the potential for more than 800 people to attend that event, that would become a qualifying event. So that premises there isn't just about buildings, it's about land as well. It's clearly going to impact shopping centres. It's clearly going to impact leisure centres. It's clearly going to impact theatres, transportation hubs and everything else. But there are some nuances within the Act where other buildings will have or will be impacted as well. So what are the duties? Well, excuse me. As a standard duty holder, you must evaluate your risk. You must produce public protection procedures. But the law also says that you must undertake appropriate training and exercises as well. So emergency preparedness training and emergency preparedness exercises as well. So that's what I want to focus on today. But you've also got to notify the SIA of your responsibility. And again, you have to cooperate and coordinate your activities if there's more than one person. If you have or are an enhanced duty holder, then you must have a designated senior individual who is the responsible person within the organisation. You must produce what's called enhanced public protection procedures that deals with other areas such as monitoring the movement of the public, physical safety and security, etc., as well as security of information. And you must bring all of that together into what's called an overview statement. So you can see that training and exercises is right at the center of the whole process, whether you're a standard duty holder or an enhanced duty holder. Training and exercises are going to be incredibly important. They are a crucial aspect of this whole process. Procedures are fantastic. Procedures, though, will never save an individual. People save individuals. Okay, so I think it's really important that we actually know and understand and make sure that the people that we have within our buildings are competent to deliver, are confident in their delivery, and they know exactly what they do. So let's look at training and emergency exercises. Enforcers are now going to expect that you not only provide evidence that you have those particular statements in place, those procedures, etc., but actually they want to see visible and demonstrable evidence that your teams know what to do in the event of emergency. I think it's really important that we recognise that training and exercises will ensure that staff and security persons know exactly what to do and how to respond effectively during an event. So training and exercises for us reduces confusion during live events. It helps staff understand various routes. It helps our staff understand the systems that you have in place, and it's going to expose those weaknesses before they are able to cause any harm. And it's also important to check and assess that what you've designed actually works. It's really important that we actually test to make sure and assess very objectively that your arrangements are providing the right level of mitigation, providing the right level of competency, and basically reducing your vulnerability to whether it's a terrorist act or any other incident as well. I think what we often see is that many organizations probably underestimate how quickly confidence deteriorates without regular practice. So training exercises will help staff identify those routes, identify potential lapses in security. They'll understand how systems work, but the most important element here is that they will gain confidence in being able to deal with any particular event or attack. So for us, emergency preparedness ensures that staff and managers not only are confident and competent to do so, but it enforces that vigilance and it makes them ready to respond to an unpredictable event or an unpredictable threat. So what is the impact then on property owners and professionals? Well, it's very clear. We've now got clearer responsibilities for owners, agents, and tenants. We now need to accept and expect that enhanced inspections from the security industry will occur. We're going to need to be able to provide evidence that not only are people competent to do so, but how have you checked that? And how have you checked to make sure that your systems are workable and are effective? But other stakeholders as well, boards of directors, investors, as well as insurers are going to pay attention. So there is going to be increased focus on your capabilities, not just the documentation. Documentation's fine, but you've got to be able to prove that it works. So what does good emergency preparedness actually look like then? Well, a good emergency preparedness process is not just a plan. It's just not just a set of procedures. Yes, they form an essential part of it, but effectively good emergency preparedness is a system. And if we were to look at that system in the same way that we do health and safety, fire safety, building safety, or even look at the guidance that's actually set out in ISO 22301, which relates to business continuity, they all base those systems around a very simple plan, do, check, act model. So that effectively includes, for example, developing a proper policy. So making sure that you've got a statement of intent, a clear strategy on how you're going to deal with emergency preparedness. Set out a good planning framework and make sure that staff are trained in respect of that particular framework. It means doing the right things by actually identifying the right hazards. Risk profiling is a really important part. Not every building is the same. You can have commercial buildings, for example, that are going to be very isolated. You're going to have commercial buildings that are associated right next door to a high hazard establishment or location, such as a transportation hub. We need to risk profile each particular building. We need to develop our emergency plans. And those emergency plans shouldn't just be focused on evacuation. We ought to think about evacuation. We ought to make sure that our emergency plans have good communication protocols, whether that's internal communication, external communication, as well as communication to the media via the public and the local community, and make sure that everybody knows what their clear roles and responsibilities are. We then need to check to make sure that all of the work that we've done is effective. So we need to undertake those tests and exercise, those preparedness tests, and we need to learn the lessons from those particular acts so we can act accordingly. Get management to review it, learn those lessons, and ensure that you change your systems, you upgrade what you're doing, and improve. It's an iterative process. You plan, you practice, you learn, you improve. What we have seen in our experience is that buildings and organizations that actually do this actually tend to recover quicker, and they protect their persons and they protect the public in a much better manner. Okay, so what are the 7 real things that an emergency framework must really answer? So the 7 questions we would suggest you need to be asking yourself is, first things first, what are the specific risks and threats to your particular building? You should be looking at making sure that your plans are based on the current and very site-specific risk profile, not, as I said, a generic template. It should be realistic. Fire, flood, protest, violence, power loss, terrorism, they are all potential impacts, but how would they impact your occupants? How would they impact your operations? And one thing that I haven't put in there, how would they impact the public at large? You need to make sure that your system determines who is in charge during an emergency. So your plan must be explicit. It must define roles. It must decide how and who has decision-making authority. And also escalation routes across the various owners, the agents, security, your FM teams, and including that, tenancies. What we have seen is that ambiguity is one of the biggest causes of failure during any real life event. We need to root out that ambiguity and make sure that everyone is very clear what they have an authority to do and what their defined roles actually are. The next question we need to ask is, how are we going to communicate both fast and accurately as well? So your plan needs to make sure that you know how and who is going to be communicating both internally and externally. What tools are you going to be using? PA systems, SMS alerts, radio systems, anything else like that. What are you going to be using in order to communicate with all of those various parties? And how are you going to maintain that consistent messaging across all parties? One of the most important elements is the press are always going to knock on doors, and the press are going to ask anybody. So if you're a security guard standing outside of a building, the press are going to ask you a question. What's happened? You really want to make sure that that message is consistent. So you really want to make sure that security guards, for example, are trained to say, sorry, you'll have to ask somebody else. I can't tell you. It's always wonderful. People love to be in the room, don't they? They love to be, I was in the room. I know exactly what's happened. But you want to make sure that those messages that you provide are consistent across all parties. So you need to make sure that every member of staff understands what they can say, what they should say, and when they should say it. And then how do you manage both media and public statements? Again, in our opinion and in our experience, communication breakdowns really do amplify risk, and they also can often cause reputational damage. You can get mixed messages out there, and those mixed messages will stick. Next section, in respect of your framework, you really need to ask the question, how do we evacuate? How do we evacuate? And how do we lock down safely? So you really need to consider your procedures. Are they realistic? Are they practiced? Are they inclusive of the occupants? And have you considered those who may have additional needs? And are they aligned as well with your tenant's operations? The worst thing you can have is a tenant evacuation plan that is different to your one. It isn't just enough now just to know how you evacuate your building. You need to know how you can stay put, how you can protect in place, as well as how you control movement depending upon that particular threat. The next question you need to be asking is, how do we coordinate with the emergency responders? So again, you need to know and make it very clear how emergency services are going to access your site, where the incident control points are going to be located, who meets, who greets, who briefs those particular responders, and what type of information are you going to be able to provide those emergency services? Building plans, information packs, where are they? Who holds them? Are they up to date? So responder coordination is really often the biggest gap that we have seen when we've undertaken tests for particular clients. That's probably the biggest area. A lot of people are saying we've got these procedures, we've tested those procedures, but actually they don't tend to deal with, okay, so how are we going to deal with emergency responders, and how are we going to get them the information they need in order to do their job? The next question then we need to be thinking about is, how do we maintain competence and confidence among everybody who's involved? So your plan needs to ensure that training of everybody involved is included. Decide how often you need to do that, and then decide how you're going to be able to prove people are competent. Management, tenants, front of house teams, FM contractors, security guards, all must understand their roles. And you cannot just assume that because someone is a security guard that they're competent. Those assumptions are going to come back and bite you. And the last question we would suggest that you need to look at is, how do we test, how do we learn, and how do we continually improve? So a credible plan is going to actually set out a schedule of exercises and a program of that. It's going to be multi-scenario. It's not just going to be fire drills. You're going to be able to document the lessons learned. You're actually going to make sure that you actually understand, okay, well, we found something. What do we do with that? Testing for us is the big difference about having a plan and actually being prepared. And if you struggle to answer any of those particular questions, then that's a gap you need to plug. Gaps, you really don't want gaps being found out at the worst possible moment. So we talked then about emergency preparedness exercises and testing. How can you go about doing it? Well, effectively, there are 4 different types of test. I've used the top 2 are the most obvious ones and the most credible ones for property managers, and they're the ones that are used most by most of our clients. So desktop and tabletop exercises. This is a scenario-based discussion, effectively, around a table. It generally happens probably annually, at the worst. Most of our clients tend to go for 6 monthly. They like to have involvement throughout the organization. Sometimes they will ask a senior manager to leave that particular meeting to replicate the fact that those particular people aren't available. So we look at that, and we also try to include some of the stakeholders, tenants, if you've got tenants who are affected. Now that's really helpful, it's really good, but unfortunately it's very infrequent, as I said, and it deals with very key areas, and it's just scenario based. The really helpful one is actually having functional team exercises. It's making sure that you have specific teams actually have on a very regular basis, monthly if possible, just a 15-minute exercise at a team meeting to go through some very clear focused issues and events. Now, the other two, again, are used. They are often used by clients. We've been involved in both, but they are much rarer. The first one is going to be a live exercise where you actually simulate real events, even down to the fact of having someone like the Casualty Bureau provide you 20 people who are going to lie on the floor with potential cuts, bruises, and other injuries. They're very rare. They do require some pretty good planning, and they do require the involvement of everybody involved. And then the biggest one is a multi-agency exercise where you're actually involving the emergency services and the local authority emergency planning teams. They are extremely rare. They do require a massive amount of planning and involvement, and they can be extremely important. But this is really important though, because this is where most organizations fall short. Most people believe that, oh, okay, well, we do a fire drill, therefore we've tested our systems. That is not going to be sufficient for modern risk and for the new compliance levels. Those exercises don't need to be complicated, but they've got to be meaningful. And to be quite frank with you, a fire drill is not a meaningful test here. Okay, so just really want to look at a very quick case study. And it's a rather opportune case study, really. Back in March 2025, the British Transport Police actually undertook an emergency exercise simulating actually a stabbing on a moving train near Huntingdon. Sounds familiar? Well, that particular emergency exercise focused on what crisis management communications were required and good, effective emergency response. And the findings of that were formulated, and the lessons learned from that exercise were very clear that if someone had that particular incident, that drivers should, in the event of a stabbing incident, not stop, but continue to the next station. That will enable much faster access by armed police and paramedics. And it was critically important to actually coordinate the messaging to make sure that the public understood what was happening. Let's jump back to the beginning of this month, 1st of November this month. We had a mass stabbing occurred on a train that was travelling from Doncaster to London's King's Cross. Just after it left Peterborough, at around about 7:39, a gentleman started to stab a number of the actual occupants. The train was then diverted to an unscheduled stop at Huntingdon, where immediately armed police arrested the suspect, and British Transport Police managed the communications between stakeholders and the media. 11 minutes, 7:39, an incident started, 7:50, the suspect arrested. We had 11 people who received hospital treatment, 9 initially reported as actually having life-threatening injuries. The LNER staff member, Samir Zitouni, has only this week been released from hospital. And in addition to that, Stephen Crean, who was a passenger, both confronted the attacker and sustained pretty severe injuries, allowing the other people to move away. So these two incidents, these two events, the planned exercise and then the real life event just months later, really do show the value of emergency preparedness testing and rehearsal. The exercise exposed critical learnings, which was then adopted during a real life event. And if you think about it, it really did save a significant number of lives. And for property teams, we can actually learn here. The message is pretty clear. If you don't rise to the occasion, then you're probably going to fall to the level of your training and your competence. Because certainly in this instance, all of the persons involved knew exactly what to do, did it, and as I said, 11 minutes later, the suspect was arrested. So how can property owners learn from that particular thing? Well, as I say, they rehearsed, they tested, and it's very, very clear that this very likely aided the coordinated response. But for property owners, regular testing is going to enable you to check that you've considered all of the appropriate hazards and risks. It's going to allow you to hopefully remove or reduce and shorten your response times and improve management and decision making during an incident. You often get what we call organizational friction, people wanting to do certain things when others are told to do others. So it reduces that operational friction because everybody knows what they have to do. It gives staff confidence that they know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. They remain far more vigilant. They are also much more competent. And again, it allows you to check on that competence and then demonstrate that you've complied. And again, I just refer back to that statement again. If you do not rise to the occasion, then you will fall to the level of your training. So testing matters. Testing is where unknown weaknesses effectively become very well-known strengths. You can do something about it. But it also can validate your coordination processes between all of the various teams, your building teams, the tenants, security, as well as external responders. And it's also allowing you to actually have that defensible evidence. So in a post-incident investigation, you've got the fact that actually, do you know what? We checked all of this. We've done some exercises. We did everything we needed to do. Without those rehearsals, you're going to actually have to assume the competence of the people because it's never proven. So the real benefits of actually undertaking a test are very simple. It increases readiness, reduces response times, it better allows people to make decisions in a much better way, especially in uncertain times. You get stronger tenant confidence because they are involved, and it also supports compliance, not only with Martyn's Law, but there are also other requirements in health and safety, fire safety legislation, and we are seeing insurers again play that particular important role now of actually checking, well, what have you got in place? Something I got told at the Home Office was that a crisis is not the time to be exchanging business cards. I think that's a really important point. A crisis is when you want to make sure that you've tested it, you've checked it, and you've implemented a plan. It may work. It may work as a test, but it may not properly work during an exercise. But I tell you, by rehearsing earlier, you will then have a much better understanding. So for us, we often see the fact that in multi-tenanted buildings, you get that fragmented accountability. So the test actually allows you to clarify that, to develop, and exercising actually allows you to actually assure those clarifications at the right time, not during an incident. And I think it's really important that we need to make sure that we understand that it's a compliance thing now. And insurers are looking. And we really have to consider the other element as well. You're going to have some real world consequences. There will be downtime. You won't be able to access your particular building. There will be media exposure. There's a potential for reputational damage. Last thing that I want to talk about then is all about competence and coordination. In our experience, the human element is always the deciding factor in real life events. Failures will almost always trace back to confusion or unclear roles or assumptions that were made or gaps in understanding. Emergency preparedness exercises gives your teams the opportunity to understand not only what to do, but how to operate together and how to operate together under stress. So for us, it ensures that your staff are able to actually know their own limits and adjust that as well. We can provide training. They know what to do and who is in charge. They know who is managing the communication, who is and how is the emergency services being coordinated, and what are tenants and others actually responsible for. So just to finish off then, always like to give people some ideas about how they can move this forward. We would certainly recommend that you conduct a gap analysis. Start by understanding as well your risks and identify any gaps that you've seen that. So make sure you undertake a gap analysis, make sure that you've understood or actually refreshed your risk profile. That does mean updating and developing your emergency and crisis management plans and systems. It's not just about the procedures, but you've got to reflect that updated risk profile, and you've also got to accept the fact that you've got responsibilities or may have responsibilities under Martyn's Law. Review and improve your communication protocols. It's a really important part here. Making sure you have the right communications with the right people at the right time will be incredibly important in order to protect your reputation. Strongly recommend that you introduce regular emergency preparedness testing. Cycle that through, whether it's desktop or team-based. Make sure that you have them on a regular basis. Get people used to it. Get people used, especially management, front of house staff, security team, your contractors, your FM team, as well as tenants. Get people used to being put under a little bit of pressure. It's helpful because when an incident occurs, you will be put under pressure. You will be asked to do certain things, and you need to make sure that you know that people know what they're going to do. So document that evidence of the training that you've undertaken. Learn lessons from those exercises and include those learnings into your new plans. Because what we can say is that the benefits of emergency preparedness are huge. Reduced business interruption, a stronger insurance confidence. You'll have a much greater satisfaction through your tenants. You'll make sure as well that you're able to actually use resilience as a value proposition. You actually be able to prove to other people, to investors, to new owners, look just how good we are. And you'll be able to provide that regulatory defense and reputational damage. As I said earlier, and I can't stress it strongly enough, every rehearsal strengthens your resilience. And your resilience and your preparedness ultimately is your reputation. Thank you very much. Tara, questions? Do we have any?
Yes, David, thank you very much for that. Very, very comprehensive. And I certainly think there's a lot of food for thought there in today's presentation, a lot of really interesting information coming from it. We have had a few questions come throughout today's webinar. So I'm just going to start with the first one that has come in. A lot of questions in regards to the statement that the buildings need to be registered. Just further clarity on what this actually means or what people need to do here to ensure that they're registering, or when do they need to action this?
Okay, registration is not been set up yet. The Security Industries Authority are now the regulator, and the regulator has proposed to the government the means and methods on how and the information that they're looking for registration. And we are expecting in the next 3 to 4 months some secondary legislation being proposed on how that is going to actually occur. You will not need to register until you are told to register, and that will become via secondary legislation. That's not out at the moment.
Okay, brilliant. Well, that leads on nicely to a couple of questions we also had in regards to the secondary legislation, just on what does that potentially look like? When is that going to come into effect? So I think you've kind of answered that already.
The implementation of this whole system, the Act came out in April. 2025 and will be fully implemented according to the government by April 2027. And it's going to be implemented in stages. So registration will be the first part. There will then be proof requirements and evidential requirements and reports that will need to be provided to the new regulator over a particular period of time. But we are going to see that now effectively over the next 18 months. We are going to see the implementation of the full Act. Everything that I showed you earlier is going to be implemented over that 18-month period.
Brilliant. Great. We've had a lot of questions come through in terms of the competence piece of your webinar this morning, and just in terms of some questions on how are we actually really supposed to prove competence, or do you have any advice on appropriate means of proving the competence?
Yeah, competence is very simply the skills, the knowledge, the experience, and the behaviours that people exhibit in completing a particular task. And the best way to do that is obviously make sure that they've had some training on emergency preparedness, make sure that they have some training on your plans, and record that information. But the best way to actually test competence is actually then to actually exercise. Produce or undertake exercises, if you think about it, are the ideal time to make mistakes. They are the best time to make mistakes because no one's going to be hurt, no one's going to be injured, no one's going to be affected. So it's really a good important approach to have regular exercises. Start off with perhaps the management, the desktop approach, but certainly integrate those individual team-based exercises. Have your cleaning team do an exercise of what they are going to do if, for example, they have a particular incident. Select a number of different incidents and actually then determine what they have to do. Make sure your procedures are actually very clear that that's what they are expected to do. And you can then record those and record those lessons learned. And as you get better, your ability to respond to those tests will be proven. And that is the one way that you can prove competency.
Brilliant. I think that answers it beautifully, David. Thank you. In regards to emergency framework, so we have had a kind of reoccurring theme in the questions in regards to this element, primarily really in terms of would you recommend, due to the level of detail that's required here, the level of information that's needed in your emergency framework, that you would engage with a third-party supplier to support and actually comprehensively developing this framework?
Now that's a very interesting question. Of course I would, because we do provide those services, but I think it's really, really key. Property managers, property owners and tenants know their own buildings. Yes, if you feel that you need to have people involved in the process, get people involved, but also make sure that you are involved as well. Don't just rely upon a contractor, a consultant coming in and telling you, here's your plan, here's what you got to do, bye-bye, leave you to it. You really do need to be involved. You need to question, you need to check, you need to work in partnership. And I think that's the really important part. You need to work in partnership with that consultant. We're consultants. Ark Workplace Risk are consultants. I'm of course going to turn around and say, of course, go out and utilize a consultancy. But just also be prepared that actually it needs a significant amount of input from you if it's going to be your plan, if it's going to be you, because ultimately the consultant's not going to be delivering any particular messages to the public. Your consultant's not going to be implementing those procedures. You will. So you need to be heavily involved.
Right. Okay. Thank you, David. We have had other questions come through, but I'm just very conscious of the time. So what we will do is we will respond on each question raised and provide the responses as well as the slides from today's webinar. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time on today's webinar. And if you have any further questions or would like further guidance and support on anything that was gone through this morning in David's webinar, please feel free to reach out directly to Ark Workplace Risk, and we will be happy to engage further in any conversations that have stemmed from this morning. So thank you for your time, and we will conclude today's webinar.
Thank you very much.